Welcome to Trumpet World. We are 4 episodes in, and already we have to talk about Taylor Swift. We'll get to her concert being cancelled due to threats of an Islamist terrorist attack later. We'll also talk about stock market jitters in America. We'll briefly introduce you to Kamala Harris's vice presidential pick. We'll look at the effects of Storm Debbie and get the latest from the Middle East when many are nervous that we could see an Iranian strike at any moment. First, I want to start by talking to Jeremiah Jacques about a couple of stories from Asia where I've seen quite a lot of headlines about them, but I haven't been able to dig into them the way I would like. One of the most intriguing headlines of all that I have seen this week is that Ukraine has actually invaded Russia. Jeremiah, thanks for joining us. What can you tell us about that?
Thanks for having me. Yes, this is a fascinating story, but Russians in the west of the nation have been horrified this week to see Ukrainian forces invading their region on a significant scale. So this is in the Kursk region of Russia, the area that borders Ukraine there. And this isn't the first time that Ukrainians have made incursions in this area since the full-scale war broke out. And when it began on Tuesday, it looked like it may just be another minor incursion, maybe just a bit of a PR stunt with limited significance. But as the days go by, we see that this is much larger in scale. There are around 1,000 Ukrainian troops that are involved here, apparently, with at least a dozen tanks and many armored vehicles as well. Some reports actually say several thousand Ukrainians are involved. But in either case, this is a region that Russia did not expect to have to defend. And so the Russians apparently left it wide open with very little military presence here. Right now, almost all of Russia's troops are hundreds of miles to the south and to the west of this region. They are in Ukraine, which means they're not here in Russia to defend this area. So the Russians are in Ukraine and the Ukrainians are in Russia. And since the area wasn't well defended, the Ukrainians were able to really steamroll through. The maps that Russia is publishing as of Thursday morning show that the territory now covered by this advance is really stunning. Ukraine now controls about 130 square miles of land. And as I said, that's Russian news outlets showing this map. So it's not just a case of Ukrainian propagandists kind of exaggerating the success of this. And to have taken 130 square miles or 350 square kilometers, that's quite significant. And that means that Ukraine has advanced deeper into Russia in the last 3 days than Russia has advanced into Ukraine in several months. And it's also not just simple territory that Ukraine has taken over. Their armed forces now control the Sudza gas metering station in Russia. This is a major energy hub. It's shocking to me that Russia left this place mostly undefended. Almost 50% of Russia's gas exports to the EU flow through this one station. And it's actually the only operational pipeline that Russia has that supplies the European market. But Ukraine now controls it and very well may destroy it. So that alone really raises the stakes with all of this. But ultimately, I don't know if we should expect Ukraine, I don't think we should expect them to indefinitely hold this territory. This tactic is likely just an attempt by Ukraine to divert some Russian forces who are in eastern Donbass to kind of lure them away from their positions there, to give some relief to Ukrainian forces that are stretched very thin in that area. So, it's hard to know exactly how this will go in the days ahead. Will Russia pull a bunch of its troops out of Ukraine so that it can put these Ukrainian invaders down? Will Ukraine keep on advancing toward Moscow? I think that's unlikely. They would still have about 400 miles to go from where they are. But in any case, this does seem to have really caught the Russians off guard. It is a big humiliation for Russian President Vladimir Putin, and it does escalate the conflict by a significant margin for the Russians. This was clear on Wednesday when Russia actually declared a state of emergency for the Kursk region. And Russia also appealed to the international community to condemn the invasion, which is, very rich for some obvious reasons. But however it goes, there's quite a lot for us to keep an eye on here.
That is what a lot of my questions revolve around, because a lot of people watching what is happening from the West, I think we see a lot of wishful thinking. Like whenever something positive is happening for Ukraine, or even say with the sanctions against Russia, for most people in the West, we want Russia to lose, we want Ukraine to win. Therefore, just because we want Vladimir Putin to be out of office, and it's easy to understand why people would want him to be out of office, he's a very violent, bloody dictator. But because we want that outcome, we're kind of very keen to jump on anything that happens as evidence that he is imminently to be overthrown, when in reality that's not really the case. So this isn't the imminent fall of I mean, there've been lots of excited tweets, say, on this subject, but this isn't the imminent fall of Russia. And actually, you expect Vladimir Putin to kind of come back, at least in the long run, stronger and harder, right?
That's right. Yes. Yeah, it's true that the war in many ways has not gone the way that Putin and the rest of Russia expected it would. At the start of this, back in February of 2022, they said that it would be a very easy win that would take just a few days, since many Ukrainians, they calculated that Ukraine actually wanted Russia to take over. But here we are, 2.5 years in, and Russia was blindsided by just all the resistance, the fierce resistance they faced from the Ukrainians. And then, of course, you've had this setback just this week, and it is a setback for Russia, but this is certainly not the end for Russia's war. Putin remains fiercely determined to conquer Ukraine, and this could even be something that prompts him to intensify Russia's aggression there, possibly even with some of those tactical nuclear weapons that we spoke about on last week's program. Although using nuclear weapons on your own land, that does present some complications. But in either case, though, Putin remains fiercely, unwaveringly determined. And Bible prophecy actually gives us some insights into his determination. There's a passage of Bible prophecy, Ezekiel 38 and chapter 39 as well. And Trumpet editor-in-chief Gerald Fleury says this is discussing a certain Russian leader in the modern era. And this is a man who will be the leader of a vast bloc of Asian nations in the near future. And Mr. Fleury says that the Russian man in these chapters is none other than Vladimir Putin. So, we can't say for certain how Ukraine's incursion into Kursk will ultimately go, or what all the specifics of the whole war will be. But Mr. Fleury says that one thing we can be sure of is that Putin will not be pushed out of power. And in fact, in the years ahead, he'll become much more powerful. And soon he'll be leading a far larger army that includes the forces of several other nations. And he has a booklet all about these Bible chapters and his understanding of them. It's called The Prophesied Prince of Russia. That booklet actually has a fair amount to say specifically about Ukraine. It says that Ukraine is, quote, the linchpin of Putin's goal of a renewed imperial Russia. So for anyone who would like to know about Russia's war on Ukraine in the context of prophecy, that booklet would be just invaluable for that.
And I think it's a great example of how Bible prophecy helps us understand world news, because there's a lot of confusion about the conflict in Ukraine. And there's a lot of people that are out there saying Vladimir Putin is the good guy. A lot even on the right that are kind of, okay, maybe pro-Putin is putting it too strongly, but they'll point to the family values message, say, that's coming out of Russia, and then there's this narrative of the Ukrainian war that says, it kind of paints America or Ukraine as the aggressor, that they were about to join NATO. And I think you can get to the truth of all of this without Bible prophecy. You just look objectively at the facts, and Ukraine was nowhere near joining NATO when Vladimir Putin invaded. That joining NATO requires unanimous consent. Germany had already denied putting Ukraine on the path to joining NATO publicly on previous occasions. Finland had a hard time joining. Or was it Finland? Yeah, Finland. Finland and Sweden had a hard time joining NATO, which are about the least offensive countries on earth. So, Ukraine was never going to be joining NATO. So I think you can get to the bottom of that anyway. But then also, Bible prophecy reveals the character of this man, Vladimir Putin. And Mr. Flurry talks a lot about that in that booklet. And it was written before the invasion. And based on those Bible prophecies, Mr. Flurry has a description of Vladimir Putin, level of evil on the or evil on the level of Joseph Stalin. That kind of thing. The Bible informs us about Vladimir Putin. That helps you understand the world news. That helps you understand he's not a good guy. He is not the savior of Western values. And like I said, an objective look at the world shows you that too. But we have so much news coming at us, so many different opinions, so many manipulated facts. It can be hard to wade your way through that. But Bible prophecy can really help us cut right through. And so that Prophesied Prince of Rosh booklet is essential to understanding what is going on in Ukraine. And then, like you say, the role that Vladimir Putin plays in end time events, because he is absolutely critical leader in those events. And God has a plan and a purpose for him. He is going to use him, and then he is going to correct him. And so that book helps us put all of that in context. So the other story that I've been seeing quite a lot about from your region this week, Jeremiah, and have had a hard time getting my head around, is Bangladesh. These big riots, it looks like the government's been, or at least the main leader's been forced out. Can you tell us what is going on with all of this violence in Bangladesh?
Yes, yeah. On Monday, the Prime Minister of Bangladesh resigned and fled the country, and her resignation came after weeks of protests and a heavy crackdown on the protesters. More than 400 people were killed in the violence, including 100 who were killed just on Monday alone, over 100. And then another 10,000 have been imprisoned. The protests were ostensibly, at least, they were over a quota system for government jobs. But there's a lot of seething hatred there that goes beyond just that, the job quotas issue. And eventually, the military got to a point that they refused to keep on suppressing the protests. And that's when Prime Minister Hasina was forced to flee. She had actually been in power since 2009 and for an earlier stint as well, starting all the way back in the 90s. So she was really entrenched there. And it's quite chaotic in Bangladesh right now, and particularly difficult for the Hindus in Bangladesh. This country is 90% Muslim, and some of them seem to be using this time of political chaos to really target the Hindu minorities. So Bangladesh is now plunged into uncertainty. The military has promised to put an interim government together just until elections can be held. But until then, this is a new region of many unknowns. And don't forget, Bangladesh is not a small country. This is a nation of 170 million people, the eighth largest country on earth by population. So this really introduces just a considerable amount of uncertainty into the world.
Well, thank you very much for putting that in the wider context. Now, in the notes that you provided me, your final story involves, and I quote, an enormous new invasion mothership. So I am very intrigued. What's that about?
Yes, this is a new warship that China is building, and it's the largest invasion ship in the world. This is actually bigger than some countries' aircraft carriers, even though it is not being considered to be a full-blown aircraft carrier. China has some of those, but this one isn't in that category. But this new ship, it's the Type 076 warship. It displaces about 42,000 tons of water, so really remarkable size. And it is an amphibious assault ship. It'll carry a number of war helicopters and fighter jets and drones and amphibious landing craft as well. And over 1,000 Marines will be passengers on this. So I think this is very revealing in terms of China's seriousness about invading Taiwan. This new behemoth would be instrumental in that invasion that China's dead set on waging. And it actually goes beyond Taiwan. This new ship and the overall buildup of China's naval power shows that China is building a military for power projection beyond its coasts, far beyond its coasts. So this should be concerning not just to Taiwan, but also to the Philippines and Vietnam and even Japan and South Korea, and many others. This is a sign that China is trying to take over Asia and that China is steering the world toward war.
Well, thank you very much for that rundown of Asian news, Jeremiah. There's also been no shortage of news from the US, as has been typical. And perhaps one of the most concerning for people all around the world was this stock market downturn that started with the Japanese stock market earlier in the week, probably because of their time zone, but quickly spread. And of course, as we all know, when America sneezes, the rest of the world catches a cold. Andrew Miller now joins us from the United States to tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, this is something a lot of people are concerned about. That drop in the Japanese market was actually one of the biggest ones in decades. The drop in the American market was more moderate, but still more than 1,000 points, which is something to be concerned at. And it's primarily driven by, I think, two main reports that we've heard with some bad economic news in America. The first and primary report was the one that America only created about 140 something thousand jobs in June, which is considerably less than the number of illegal immigrants who crossed the southern border in June. So if you're creating less jobs than there are illegal immigrants, you're definitely creating less jobs than there are total immigrants, and far less jobs than there is total population growth. So the unemployment rate is going up. That was a big factor in that stock market drop. Another probably lesser known report I think could have factored into it is one that Elon Musk is highlighting. It's also the fact that America, in the month of June, we spent 76% of all taxes collected in June on the national debt, on the interest on the national debt. I don't think that 76% figure is going to average out for the whole year, but it is just highlighting the fact that America is in a position where it's losing jobs and the giving away probably the lion's share of its tax revenues on the debt it already has, which has made the markets jittery and really contributed to this big 1,000-point drop. Now, generally, what the investors want in order to like have more confidence in the stock market and get that those numbers back up is they want the Federal Reserve to cut interest rates. If they figure, well, we can cut interest rates, it's expensive to borrow money right now. The Fed interest rates, it's over 5%. So if we can cut those rates and get it so we can actually start borrowing money again, spending money again to start creating some jobs, we can get those unemployment numbers down. Now, the Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell said that he's definitely not going to do that next month, or he's definitely not going to do that this month. He's like, maybe September, maybe not September. He's mainly concerned with the fact that the inflation crisis is going to come right back as soon as he cuts those rates. Well, back in Joe Biden's second year in office, inflation in America got up to over 9%. It's come down to 3% because they're cutting those interest rates, but they don't want that back, especially the Federal Reserve does tend to lean liberal, so I'm not going to overtly accuse them of political manipulation, but it is also possible that they definitely, I think they'd almost prefer to have the bad job numbers than the bad inflation numbers with an election coming up soon. So I did an article for this on our website that really kind of points out that the American economy is wedged in between a rock and a hard place right now, because just how supply and demand works, like one out of every $3 in circulation were pumped into circulation since the COVID crisis. So if you're looking at inflation if you wanted to write an equation for the value of a dollar, the dollar is the value of the American economy divided by how many dollars are there. So the more dollars you print out of nothing, the less each one's worth. So the fact that you expanded the money supply by 50%, so that one in every $3 in circulation, it's going to make the dollars worth less. It's going to cause inflation. Now that they've done it, it's in the past. There's nothing they can do to get rid of that inflation, except raise the interest rate so high that people pull that money out of circulation and put it in bank accounts. So that's kind of the math the Federal Reserve's using to get the inflation down, is get the money out of circulation, get it locked away in a money market account or a long-term savings account or a CD. But as soon as you cut the interest rates, all that money they printed during COVID is going to come flooding right back into the market. Jobs will grow, but the inflation is going to come right back.
Thanks for that pretty straightforward explanation of what could be some quite complicated subjects with interest rates and unemployment rates, etc. But we've been watching for an economic crisis within the United States, expecting this to have very wide-ranging implications.
Definitely, because you're looking at these numbers now, and like I said, I expect that this week's stock market crash, it'll probably recover, but it is shining a spotlight on much longer term problems. The fact that like you're spending 76% of all the tax revenues you got in June on the interest rate is terrifying, because eventually as you get closer and closer to spending 100% of your tax revenues on interest rates, you go bankrupt. You get to the point where it's like you can't raise enough money just to pay the interest on your debt, and so you're looking at, I mean, long term, like it might not be this year, it might not be next year, but like on the road America's going at, it is heading towards bankruptcy, and which is something we have a particular interest in from not just a financial analysis point, but also from a geopolitical point, is that our editor-in-chief, Mr. Gerald Flurry, he's actually referred to something that he calls Mr. Herbert W. Armstrong's greatest personal prophecy. Herbert W. Armstrong was the founder of our predecessor organization, The Plain Truth, and he made what he called like a personal prophecy. So I'll explain the difference briefly. A Bible prophecy is a prophecy that's directly listed in the Bible. A personal prophecy is your own personal prediction based on those Bible prophecies. Now, the Bible prophecies in like Revelation 17 say that a 10-nation union in Europe is going to conquer end-time Israel, which is the United States and Britain. So that's an ironclad Bible prophecy from God about this 10-nation combine in Europe that's going to conquer the United States and Britain. Now, just looking at the world scene, if you look at the statistics between what the U.S. military is like and what the EU military is like, any geopolitical analysis would put their money, if they were a betting person, on America winning that fight. So something, for that Bible prophecy to be fulfilled, something's got to change that not only levels the playing field between Europe and America, but actually makes Europe the stronger power. And then looking back at history and financial statements and other things like that, Mr. Armstrong strongly felt that it would be an economic crisis originating in the United States that would be the mechanism that would allow that Bible prophecy to be fulfilled. You just get this economic crisis that not only devastates America's military power, but also provides a strong impetus for these various nations in Europe that have long histories of conflict with each other to put aside their differences and say that we actually have a bigger thing we need to cooperate on, which is actually getting out of this economic crisis and building ourselves into a superpower that can not only compete with the United States, but dominate the United States. And so whenever we see things like this happen in the U.S. stock market, that's actually one of the big questions you always ask is like, well, how is this affecting America's power? But also, how's Europe going to respond to these type of crises? Because there's like this could be a catalyst that could get nations like France and Italy and Germany, which haven't historically been all that close, to actually be working on the same team.
Thank you for putting that in that just really important context. That this does have, I mean, it's going to affect your wallet. It's ultimately going to affect your standard of living in some very dramatic ways, but have those crucial geopolitical effects as well. And Trumpet Editor-in-Chief Gerald Flurry went over that. He had a July 2023 article, America's Banking Crisis Will Unite Europe, where he talked about that. And then we also have a trends article, Why the Trumpet Watches America's Economic Collapse. You get those trends articles. We have a trends section on the top right-hand corner of our website. That's a great place to get speedily caught up to date on some of these Bible trends, where we try and break things down very simply, give you a pretty good idea of what these scriptures say, and help you prove these subjects before yourself. And those trends articles are a good way to quickly get into a lot of these issues and see how they relate directly to your Bible. And we've also seen some major news from the Democratic Party, including the new vice presidential pick. Can you give us a quick update there, Andrew?
Yeah, a couple big things in the Democratic Party this week. For one, Kamala Harris formally got her nomination. We've known for a little bit that she was likely going to be the nominee, but she formally got her nomination on Monday. And then right the next day, picked her vice presidential candidate, which actually kind of surprised me. I was telling people I thought she was going to go for Senator Mark Kelly from Arizona. And there's a number of others that thought she'd probably go from Senator Josh Shapiro from Pennsylvania. Arizona and Pennsylvania being important swing states on the edge in an upcoming election that could help her be more competitive against Donald Trump. She actually ended up picking Tim Walz, who's the governor of Minnesota, which a number of people were surprised at, just because Minnesota has been a pretty strong Democratic stronghold since Reagan, like since the early 80s. There was never really any question in anyone's minds that Harris was going to win Minnesota. There's a question in their minds whether she's going to win Pennsylvania and Arizona. But she chose Tim Walz anyway. And it could be for some disturbing reasons. A lot of the speculation is on why she made that decision is the other runner-up, Josh Shapiro. Not only is he Jewish, but he's one of the few Democrats who's actually said a few nice things about Israel in the past. And with the current mood in America, with the anti-Israel protest on a campus, and Harris herself boycotting Netanyahu's speech to Congress, shows that there could actually be some anti-Semitism at play here, where you're picking a candidate from a state you don't really need just because he's less pro-Israel than the other options. Because other than that, I don't keep close tabs on domestic Minnesota politics, but the other things that Tim Walz is famous for on the internet, on the national scene, is when they had the Black Lives Matter riots in Kenosha a few years back. He's the one that really didn't do anything to stop that and just let the rioting burn. And actually, he partnered with Harris in the response to that. So that's what a lot of people are saying. It's like, yeah, it's like the last time Harris and Walz teamed up was to watch the city of Kenosha get burned down.
Yeah, he somehow managed to, most impressively, I think, annoy both sides with that one. The right for being so slow to call out the National Guard, and the left for calling out the National Guard at all. There's also been, I've seen a lot of headlines this morning talking about his military record, and has he overrepresented it? Did he leave the National Guard before it was deployed to Iraq, which it looks like he did. But the other big piece of news from America this week was Hurricane Debbie, that I think hit the US twice, if I've read that correctly, hitting America, heading back out to sea, hitting again. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, well, the first time it hit, it was a Category 1 hurricane. I think by the second time, it's been downgraded to a tropical storm, so it's no longer a proper hurricane, but it's still it's killed at least 6 people, as the last I checked, and prompted Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, and North Carolina, 4 states, to declare states of emergency. So some definite destruction that's definitely exacerbating economic curses in those states, at least. Actually, overall, it looks like 2024 has been not the worst hurricane season in U.S. history, but definitely above average in terms of number of hurricanes that are causing problems like these across the Gulf Coast and Atlantic coast.
And we have a booklet, Why Natural Disasters, that gets into more of exactly why. I think that really is a fantastic little booklet. One of the Bible has a lot of key prophecies that talk about God using weather curses. And that booklet takes you through all of those prophecies, shows you how God is trying to get our attention through things like this hurricane. But then also, well, that immediately raises other questions. Why does a loving God allow natural disasters? Are those victims of natural disasters, the people that got hit with Hurricane Debbie or the particular locations, are they particularly sinful? Was this specific punishment on them? And that book has some great answers as well to those deep questions along those lines of, well, why suffering and what is God's purpose on this earth? So I'd really encourage you to look up that one if you have those same questions. That's Why Natural Disasters in quotes on the cover there, and you can get that on our library on the Trumpet website. Well, coming up back to this side of the pond here in the UK and in Europe, migrant riots have been the big deal in British news this week, but Wednesday's show was all about the truth behind Britain's riots. So if you want to know more about that, go back, take a look at what we talked about on Wednesday. One of the big stories from Europe is that the threat of an Islamic terrorist attack shut down 3 Taylor Swift concerts in Vienna. So organizers said, we have no choice but to cancel the 3 scheduled shows for everyone's safety. The police arrested 2 men for planning an attack. One of them had pledged allegiance to the Islamic State. It looked like he was an Albanian Muslim that had signed up with that terrorist group. There's nearly 200,000 people that had expected to attend those concerts. I mean, if that's somebody's losing a lot of money. Those tickets, I don't think are cheap. So there's millions of pounds gone there. So it seems to imply to me, maybe there's an abundance of caution in there, but it seems like that would be a pretty serious threat to cancel all of that. But it also shows even just one person planning attack, if he doesn't even get close to carrying it out, or at least doesn't carry it out, can inflict a huge amount of economic damage. So it reminds us that the threat of Islamist terrorist attack on Europe is very real. And just like we talked about with migration on the Wednesday show, Islamist terrorist attack is something that could very quickly change Europe in the direction that we have been forecasting, that the Bible says it's going to go in, getting them more involved in the Middle East to deal with many of those problems. So, keep watching, keep an eye on that story. There was a French general who told Politico this week that Europe needs to improve how it transports troops and weapons across the continent to deter Russian aggression. You may remember, if you watched last week's show, Jeremiah and I finished talking up about how Russia's invasion of Ukraine is transforming Europe. We stuck a short segment of that on YouTube. If you missed that, if you want to just go and look at that short 5-6 minute video there where we were talking about that. But this is a concrete example of that, where European leaders are saying, well, we need to come together more militarily so that we have systems in place where French troops can travel over to Europe's borders with Russia much more rapidly. And then Germany, the foreign policy expert from Germany's Christian Democratic Union Party, one of their main right-wing parties, he published an interview with Spiegel where he said the German government must finally wake up and offer Israel military support to defend itself. He talked about Germany joining a coalition to protect Israel. He says it is conceivable that fighter jets from friendly nations could be refueled, but also that the German army could use its own Eurofighters, for example, to defend against Iranian drones. So we could see another way that Europe gets, or that is another way, we will see Europe get more involved in the Middle East. We talked about Hosea on Wednesday's show, and we focused on what Hosea says about Britain, but some of those same passages that we went over talked about Judah. That's Israel in the Middle East, trusting in Assyria, biblical Germany, turning to Germany for protection. And so as you see Germany saying, well, we need to protect Israel, that's a fulfillment of Bible prophecy. And we're certainly seeing Germany moving very rapidly in that direction after the October 7th terrorist attacks. I think it's fascinating. You look at some of the first articles, Trumpet Editor-in-Chief Gerald Flurry was writing after those October 7th attacks, and he was saying, well, watch how Germany responds. This is going to fulfill Bible prophecy. And even just in the few months since those attacks, we have really seen that. It's a wonderful example of a very speedy and direct fulfillment of Bible prophecy. I mean, we have that trumpet cover that if you're watching the video, you can see on the screen now, with just the yellow background and the German eagle, all about Israel turning to Germany. That's a great place that you can go to learn more about this. If you go again onto our website, thetrumpet.com, if you go to that library tab, you can get to all of our past trumpet issues. Go find that issue and you can read a lot more about that. Well, all of these stories, or most of them, overlap with our final region that we're going to talk about today, the Middle East. So Simon is joining me in the studio to give us a rundown on what is going on there.
Yes, well, the big story ties in with what we talked about last week, the assassinations of Hezbollah's Fuad Shukr and Hamas's Ismail Haniyeh. There's still quite a bit of fallout with everything that's happening with that. Iran, for its part, predictably is purging its intelligence corps, trying to figure out how they let this happen. It's since emerged that it looks like the Mossad, Israel's intelligence agencies, planted a bomb in that particular guest house almost 2 months ago. And so this was obviously happening for quite a long time, with apparently Iranian agents on the inside helping it happen. The big thing that everyone's worried about is how is Iran, how is Hezbollah, how are all these different proxy groups going to respond? And this is, you mentioned that when America sneezes, the whole world catches a cold. It seems like the same thing with Israel. As soon as, with people waiting for something to happen, like you're having flight cancellations from Tel Aviv's Ben Gurion Airport happen quite a bit. Not as bad as the cancellations that happened immediately after October 7th last year, but you're still having major airlines like Delta, Lufthansa, KLM not having service to Israel.
And this time nothing's happened. You know, after October 7th, there was an attack. Just by people being scared of their revenge, they're inflicting economic damage on Israel through these cancellations of flight and trade and things.
Indeed. And it's not even just Israel this time. Like, I've been seeing maps like showing like flight patterns, and you'll see entirely over Iraq, which is probably the Iranian proxy everyone forgets about, but it's still there. There's almost no planes flying over Iraq. There's almost no planes flying over Western Iran. There's like I don't believe it's official, but there's an unofficial ban on flights flying over Lebanon right now. Everybody is scared. What exactly is going to happen? Well, it seems like every news source has their own anonymous sources that we have to trust have their official credentials that contradict everyone else's anonymous sources. But there are rumors that Iran is going to launch a two-phase attack, perhaps one similar to what we saw in April with a large barrage of drones and missiles and other projectiles to weaken or exhaust Israel's air defenses like Iron Dome, and then do something a little bit stronger. I've also heard rumors that next week, August 12th, August 13th, overlaps with the 9th of Av, the Jewish fast day, one of the most important days in the Jewish calendar. October 7th happened right after what the Jews called Simchat Torah, what is in English referred to as the last great day. So a lot of religious Jews will have their minds on other things rather than getting ready for national defense. So that could be something.
And that was the destruction of the temple.
Yeah, the destruction of the temple.
That would be a pretty symbolic day for Iran to do something on.
Indeed. Whether they're going to go through it or not, there's a lot of people putting pressure on Iran not to do anything, on its proxies not to do anything. Israel said that if Hezbollah attacks any civilians, like they did when we were talking on this program last time before, which led up to all of this, according to one of Axios's sources, they would give a, quote, disproportionate price, whatever that means, but they've already just demonstrated they're not afraid to take out influential people. Even in Iran themselves, Ayatollah Khamenei, he's having a bit of pressure from Vladimir Putin not to target civilians because even he's afraid of an all-out war. Russia obviously has soldiers in the Middle East, has a large Muslim population, and they know that Israel is not afraid to punch above its weight. And President Pezeshkian, he's just a few days into office, and he's apparently begging Khamenei not to do anything that's going to kibosh his presidency so early. So what's going on in the Ayatollah's mind? We don't know. There's a lot of pressure on a lot of different sides, a lot of people saying different things. But at least as a time of recording, nothing's happened yet, but that could very well change within each and every day.
Now, we've also seen another piece of news in relation to the assassinations and things like that, where Hamas have picked their new political head.
Yes, it's in one sense, it's a bit of a nothing burger story, but in the other sense, it means a lot that most people aren't picking up. And their new political head, apparently chosen unanimously by the Shura Council, Hamas's shadowy membership group, is surprise Yahya Sinwar. In one sense, again, it's not really that much of a story. Sinwar.
So this is the October 7th mastermind.
Yes. This is the guy that's been governing the Gaza Strip. This is basically Israel's most wanted terrorist since October 7th. This is the guy, the big fish that seems to have evaded Israel. Even Hamas apparently doesn't even know where he is. He's lurking somewhere in the tunnels of Gaza. Again, in one sense, a bit of not much of a story. Apparently, the leadership in Qatar have been trying to get him to do things like even talk about ceasefire, and he's been stonewalling them. So more or less, he's been conducting the war with or without whatever the leadership wants. But on the other hand, this is a bit of a surprise with, in the sense that they undercut what many expected, or who many expected to be the front runner of succeeding Ismail Haniyeh, and that would have been Khalid Meshal. He was Haniyeh's predecessor, ending in 2017. He's right there with him in Qatar. He's worth billions, just like Haniyeh and all these other people are. People figured, okay, he's been in the job before. He's in Qatar, a bit more of a safer location, and he's still has a huge shadow influence in Hamas. It's funny, anytime Haniyeh seemed to go somewhere, Mashal was usually right behind him, even though technically speaking, he didn't have that much of a senior position anymore. But instead, they chose Sinwar. And there's two reasons for that. One of the reasons is Sinwar himself opposed Mashal. And the other reason is, tying in with that, is because Iran opposed Mashal. Contrary to what you might hear, not all of Hamas is necessarily under the thumb of Iran compared to some of the other terror groups, and Meshal is probably the biggest example of that. When the Arab Spring was happening in 2011, he actually supported the Syrian rebels as he was living in Damascus. That apparently got Iran's proxy in Syria so angry he had to pack up and leave and go to Qatar. And even in a few years ago in 2021, he made a visit to Lebanon, and Hezbollah apparently didn't even bother to meet with him, even though Hezbollah basically runs the country, and that's the only reason he would have even gone there. So Iran was angry, and Sinwar, for his part, apparently sent a message saying we need somebody that's closer to Iran. And looks like the rest of the Shura Council agreed with him and chose him. And all of Hamas, or at least the important people in Hamas, agree with him. And all the important people in Hamas agree that they need close relations with Iran, whatever the cost.
So the big takeaway from both of these stories really is that whatever may happen in the short run, whatever we don't know in the short run, Iranian pressure, Iranian attacks, Iranian pushing on Israel is going to continue.
Indeed. It's something you say often on this show whenever we talk about Iraq, how a few decades ago Iraq was the big fish everyone was talking about and nobody really cared about Iran. Now, Iran's the only person basically everyone's afraid of, and by extension, all of its proxies. And we've been watching for Iran to rise to this level, to really be king of radical Islamist terror, to be king of the Middle East, to be the main foe that Israel and the West are concerned with. Since the 1990s, our editor-in-chief has looked at a prophecy in Daniel 11, verses 40 through 43, which talk about a king of the north and a king of the south pushing against one another, We have plenty of material on our website to show that the King of the North is Europe, which you just talked about, which Andrew talked about, a uniting European power. And the King of the South, he's pointed to for all these decades as being Iran and its proxies and its tentacles in the region. The fact that everybody's so scared right now, not just of Iran, but Hezbollah and all these other groups, shows how much Iran has become the king of radical Islam, the only powerful player on that side of the spectrum. But also verse 41, I don't pay attention to this verse too much when I talk about this prophecy, but it's arguably the most important part, where it talks about the King of the North, as he's conquering the King of the South, entering into the glorious land, or the Holy Land, the land of Israel. And this is what our editor-in-chief, Mr. Fleury, wrote in his King of the South book, quote, "They enter into the glorious land, or the Holy Land. The Hebrew indicates this is a peaceful entry, not forced. The Jews appear to invite them in as peacekeepers. After war explodes in the Middle East, there will probably be a thunderous call for a peacekeeper in Jerusalem. The King of the North will no doubt take that job," end quote. Which implies that the King of the South is responsible for what's happening in Israel, what's happening in the West Bank, like we talked about last week, what's happening with the Palestinians trying to take Jerusalem. How this will play out, we don't know, but with somebody like Sinwar, who appears to be more of an Iranian lapdog than even Haniya and some of these other guys in Hamas are, that could very well lead to that. And if you would like to learn more, we have a trends article that was mentioned in our trends section. Why the trumpet watches Europe and Iran heading for a clash of civilizations. I could explain that.
Thank you very much for that. Now, before we finish all of this up, there's one more story that we wanted to hit from the Middle East. This time, I guess you could say another Hamas supporting organization that's not Iran has been prominent in the news.
Yes, on Wednesday, UNRWA, the United Nations Relief and Work Agency, the agency that manages the Gaza Strip and the other Palestinian territories, they fired 9 of their employees for taking part in the October 7th massacre. Now, considering that this investigation started in January, that some of these people that took part literally posted on social media what they were doing, it's amazing it took them this long to do this. Israel in June, for its part, tried to even get UNRWA listed as a terror organization, and it had a bill pass the first reading in the Knesset, so this comes as no surprise to them. When the news first broke out about this months ago, you had all these countries stripping their funding for UNRWA, and slowly but surely, including the UK recently with the new government, bring that funding back. With this new revelation, I highly doubt, well, nothing's happened so far, and I highly doubt anything's going to go forward with it, so it's almost as if the rest of the world's a given that the United Nations is doing this, or has done this, and hasn't really come to terms with it like it should, and they're still perfectly fine giving them money.
Which, I think you wrote about this in the Trumpet print a few issues ago, that what does this say if the UN, man's last best hope for peace, an organization that was founded to prevent World War III, to prevent another Holocaust, is aiding and abetting Hamas as they try to launch another Holocaust, is aiding and abetting Hamas as they try to launch another Holocaust. Is it possible to have a more spectacular failure? And is it possible to have a more spectacular failure in such an important institution? So it's it's a dangerous failure, and it shows that man's hope within himself to kind of negotiate and form an organization that can bring a peaceful solution to all of these problems has failed.
Indeed. That article is called Hamas Made in the United Nations. You can find that on our website. There's a statue outside the UN of a guy beating a sword into plowshare, and like taking the imagery of Isaiah. And I always find it funny that it was the Soviet Union who tried to basically keep God buried in their country that donated that. But this is, like you said, the biggest demonstration of what big of a failure that the UN has been so far.
Well, I'm glad you brought us back at the end to that statue, that image from the book of Isaiah about swords being beaten into plowshares. The United Nations will not and has not achieved that, but that is still an absolutely sure prophecy from your Bible. There is a time coming where swords will be beaten into plowshares or tanks made into tractors, where there will be peace to this whole world. It's not going to be brought about through man, but it's going to be brought about through God's intervention in world affairs. And we're showing you every week with this show how all of these different news events that you're seeing on a Monday morning, a Tuesday morning, every single one, or all of the big overview of world events, it all comes right from Bible prophecy. And every day as you tune into the news, as you get your news update, you're seeing proof of Bible prophecy, including that prophecy in the book of Isaiah, that a time is coming where swords will be beaten into plowshares. That's the critical perspective to remember on all of this, that it's leading to, this is all part of God's plan to end this era of man ruling over man and to bring about a new world where God will bring peace to mankind. And all of this fulfilled prophecy just points to the reliability of that promise from God. So we've mentioned quite a few different pieces of literature on the show today. There's not really one book that has come up repeatedly, but I would urge you to go and read into that to yourself. Convince yourself, prove for yourself the reliability of Bible prophecy, because then you're proving for yourself that this sure hope and this wonderful world is coming in the future. I think two of the top books we mentioned on there are actually pretty short this week: The Prophesied Prince of Rosh and Why Natural Disasters, and then a host of these other articles. It's not a massive investment of your time to go and take one of those little books or one of these articles and prove this for yourself. So I'd really urge you to do that, to go onto our website, thetrumpet.com, to track down those booklets. If you find the show notes for this show, we usually try and include as many of these links as we can to these different books. So really dig into this for yourself, prove it for yourself, and then take action based on that proof. Well, thank you so much for joining us here on Trumpet World. We'll be back on Wednesday with our midweek show. Thank you very much for engineering and production to George Haddad and Isaac Lorenz. If you want to get in touch, you can email us at trumpetworld@thetrumpet.com. And all of that literature that I've mentioned, and even if you didn't catch that, our contact details, they're all there on our website, thetrumpet.com. Until next week, keep watching your world.